Well, welcome to Technologies Now, the Business Edge. And this is a broker's perspective where we explore innovation and strategy that reshapes business and real estate. And today's guest is Brian Baniqued, an investor, syndicator, and founder of Baniqued Commercial Real Estate. Brian's built, managed, restructured multifamily assets across the U.S. while also pursuing film production, fitness, and philosophy. Brian, it's great to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me over, David. Appreciate the introduction.
Yeah, absolutely. So you started selling real estate before finishing high school, if I have my facts straight. What motivated that early start?
So, I grew up in a real estate family. So my parents had both immigrated here to the States in like 1974, and by 1979 held real estate licenses and were selling real estate. So by the time I get to my senior year of high school, and I want nothing to do with real estate at this point, because
Great.
but I decided to get a real estate license in order to pay for my way through college. And I was going into Hayward State to get a biology degree. But like I said, I've been helping my parents with their files since like I was 11, and going through and helping around the office, answering phones, doing what we now call transaction coordination work, right?
Right.
And so by the time I'm in high school, I'm just looking for a way to pay for my college. I passed my real estate license exam in January of 91. I turned 18 in March of 91, and then I start selling houses. And I graduate from high school in June of 1991, right? So I closed like 2 or 3 transactions before I graduated high school and started saving up money to pay for tuition.
That's fascinating. So you went from there to owning and managing more than 1,000 multifamily units. What? Yeah, let's bridge the story. How did you get there?
Great question. So remember, I'm this 18-year-old kid with a real estate license. I'm commuting back and forth to my college, taking college credits, and I have a real estate license. And so, real estate license, as we all know, selling real estate is feast or famine, especially when you're like a young-looking 18-year-old in 1991 with interest rates like at 10.5 on the average, right?
Wow.
And we were going through the first big recessionary period that was caused by the S&L scandal. So you had lots of foreclosures.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, like the Cold War had pretty much ended, so there was a lot of layoffs in Southern California that were all defense industry related. They all migrated into what we now call tech and biotech and all that stuff. So it was a rough climate to be in. And so, of course, I'm saving up commissions, feast and famine, paying for my way through college. The majority of what I ended up selling was multifamily, like 4-unit buildings. And why I did that was because I learned financing really quickly. FHA, 3.5% down. The maximum number of units you can buy is 4 with 3.5% down. So I made a practice of buying my own fourplex, living in 1 unit. Now I have rental property, and I'm closing deals, paying for my way through college. When a client would come to me, instead of like selling them a house, I would qualify them. And I go, oh, look, you got 15% down or 10% down. Let's take 3.5% of it, buy a fourplex first. You move in one of the units because you don't own a primary residence. And then in like 3 to 6 months, I'll sell you a house, because from a lender's perspective, it's an upgrade and you can buy a house with 5% down. So I would maximize one client into 2 transactions a year. And then I started doing the loans behind them too. So I do the FHA loan, do an FHA purchase, and then do the 95% owner occupied, 5% down. And I'd take one client and do 4 transactions a year, right? And then I'd always start telling the client, hey, don't get attached to your fourplex. There's a thing called 1031 exchanges. I do it too. I'd run an algorithm so they could see, hey, when you buy a 4-unit building or any income property, which doesn't work for single family, right? Single family, it's always got a very low return. But the moment you start going 4 units and you raise the rents every couple of years, then the value goes up exponentially because you got this net operating income. So long story short, I'd say, hey, I'm going to sell you a fourplex, then I'm going to sell you a house. And they go, why in that order, right? Well, because if you buy a house, they won't believe you're going to live in the fourplex. But if you don't own a house and you buy a fourplex, it makes perfect sense. And then it's an upgrade, so it makes even more sense from a lender's standpoint that you move out of an apartment building and into a house. And now you got an income property that supplements the mortgage payment on your house. Relax, I did the same thing. I have this house, I have these fourplexes, and then I get to save my commissions. In your case, you should save your earned income, and then if you like investing, I'll go sell you more apartment buildings.
Yes.
That was my mantra. And so as I started doing that, I became a 1031 tax deferred exchange specialist. I started understanding, zero down, FBA, FHA financing. And then of course, as I'm selling these 4-unit buildings for my clients 2 years later, and I'm doing the same with myself, I'm exchanging them into 5 units or more. So there was a whole different dynamic to financing a 5-unit or more deal. You couldn't do it with 3.5% down. So I would just time the increase of value on the fourplex. So I would, long story short, as they're holding on to the fourplex for 2 years to 3 years, and I'm looking at the increased rents on the 4 units, let's just say that the value of the fourplex went up $100,000. Then I could say, hey, look, you could hold on to this, or you could let me list it and sell it, and then I'll take your $100,000 plus your other money and roll you into this 8plex. So that was the practice that I did of leapfrogging my clients from a 4 to an 8 to a 12 to a 16 and so forth, right? And by the time I had been doing that between 1991 and 1998, and the time that I got my biology degree, I was making so much more money doing real estate that by the time I got my degree, and I just decided, let me work in a lab for 6 months and just see if I like it. And when I didn't like it, right? It was really boring doing recon.
Right.
And
doesn't compare to real estate. Yes.
Yeah, it doesn't compare to real estate. I said, hey, no, I'm gonna start my own company in 1998 because I've been in the business now 7 years. And so in 1998, I had my broker's license. I had 5 apartment buildings myself. I owned a house. I had done similar stuff for my clientele. So the funny thing is my first 8 real estate agents were my past clients. Right? I had sold them 2 fourplexes, rolled it into 16 units or whatnot, and then they all kind of got their real estate license, and they're working in various fields from comptroller at Chevron to some of the biopharmaceutical firms in the Bay Area. And then they had passive income now because I'd set them up into this path of buying 4plexes, 8plexes, 12plexes, that kind of stuff. And I'd do the financing in between. So I'm saving up my own money and I'm buying more buildings. So by the time I got to 1998 and I have a broker's license, 8 of my clients whose portfolios I built up, all of them kind of subsequently started asking, hey, I'm going to retire. How about I get my real estate license and I come to work with you? Wow. So I was like, sure, right? So,
right.
I'm this 27-year-old kid broker, I'm 27-year-old's not really a kid, right? Well, actually, I was 25 when I started the company.
That's kind of a kid. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. And I had these first 8 real estate agents. They're all older than me, which makes me look even younger. And because they had gone through my mantra of 1031 exchanging into bigger and bigger units, they already knew the hang of it. So they would do that for other clients, and it kind of became pretty exponential. So by the time 1999, 2000 rolled around, I had my real estate office. I sold my 5 buildings that I owned, and I exchanged it into bigger buildings, a 60 unit, a 38 unit, a 20 unit. This office building I'm talking to you from, I bought it in 2001, and it was a 21,000 square foot, 12 office facility. So I ran my real estate office out of one of the units, and then of course by this time, and I'm cutting out a lot just for the sake of the audience, I'm becoming really, really fluent with tax laws and taking advantage of depreciation, and then as a real estate agent taking advantage of accelerated depreciation. So Of course, I have my own real estate company, which is a corporation at this point, paying rent to a office building
Mm-hmm.
that I own in a separate LLC. So I'm taking my gainful income from commissions, reducing the taxable income on it, and then I'm depreciating it so that there's, I'm sitting on lots of cash, right? And that's the same exact methodology that I would kind of encourage my clients to do, right? So as they bought more buildings, they'd have more disposable cash. We'd accelerate our depreciation. We understand how to hold things in single asset LLCs. Back in like 1999 when they first started coming out with LLCs, I remember my attorney telling me like why we're doing, what an LLC is and why you're doing it. It's still untested. You don't know how it's going to operate differently between a C corp or an S corp. And I'm like, okay, what should I do?
Right. Yes.
Of course, I just followed that lead, and then later, as I got to understanding how these corporations worked and how what the benefit they had for holding real estate and also getting loans behind the real estate, I developed a lot of those types of skills that kind of set me apart from the competition. And so that's how I kind of transitioned from just selling houses and then having a primary focus on multifamily, because as a college student, it's feast and famine. So it all was all to kind of satisfy an initial need of living in a unit and having 3 rental incomes. And then when I did the math and I moved out, the cash flow I got from the 4 units was enough to almost pay the mortgage on a house with 5% down. Now, keep in mind back then, the values of the properties were much lower because the interest rates were like 10.5. And
Mm-hmm.
so, even though the rents were really high, the prices were low and they kept them very low. Now, of course, by the time you got interest rates beginning to drop from 10.5 to 8.5 to 9.5 to 7.5, that availability of capital and accessibility made the values of the property inflate significantly, right? And so, of course, now when I'm sitting on all these assets that give me income with low cost basis, and then they provide tax shelter against my income as a real estate broker, and plus I'm taking a piece of my agent's commissions, and then plus I'm doing loans for all these. And I have the shelters. It allowed me to go in and start having a pretty high net worth. Then of course that attracted developers saying, "Hey, would you like to partner with me? I need
Mm-hmm.
a money person like you to stand up for this type of a construction loan." And of course, at that point, I'm getting to understand how syndications and partnerships work, and then how they relate to these different entities or LLCs that I'm creating. So, by that time it was around 2004. I have a bunch of apartment units that I'm taking in as rentals, and it was all mainly to satisfy this need of having income that wasn't dependent on a real estate commission. And then, of course, the real estate, having the real estate agents and office there always allowed me to create and open myself up to new opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
And then it attracted a class of clientele that would kind of come to me by word of mouth and from advertisements that I did. And back then, it was all the advertisements were in these magazines, right? You probably have seen them.
Right.
I don't know for the age of the audience, but we'd pay for 2-page spreads in these real estate magazines that advertised anywhere from houses to apartment buildings. So I became a regular fixture of that, and people would call in, and that was how we prospected.
So how's that changed from those days in paper? Because we don't see paper anything anymore.
Yeah.
What do you use now to, increase business? Is it mostly word of mouth? Is it, leverage from your team, or where do you go with it?
So no, that's a great question. I mean, how I leverage now, we deploy a lot of technology, right? So nowadays, when I have new agents come on board, one of the first things I'm training them to do is how to run an individual's email or mobile number to determine who the individual's background is, their demographic, their income, and
Right.
who all their other connections might be, right? So, I kind of tell the agents like, hey, use these powers for good. Don't, because you're
Not for
pulling
evil. Yes.
Yeah. You don't use them for nefarious purposes. Do them so you could be a service to your clientele, because if you use, you're gonna learn a lot about the individual. But part of how, because I'm jumping ahead now, part of all those different things that I learned as I would meet people organically, do them through paper, run a loan application, so you're seeing their bank accounts, their job, their history, and then of
Everything.
course you're advising them on how to, well, you want to buy apartments, you want to build a real estate portfolio, here's how I would do it from where your starting point is, right? So fast forward to today, everybody is email and mobile phone driven, and now you can, when people call in on a mobile number, unless it's a burner phone, that mobile number has that entire individual's history. And so we'll run that. It will get that we'll get a little bit of information as to who they are, so that when they come to us with, hey, this is what my goal is, here's what I'd like to do, so I call it that entry and exit strategy, then we can at least give them guidance on how to do that based upon where they might be in life, right? So and so when we're going it from that approach, it opens up our prospecting very differently. Like when I started in 1991, I was given a phone book and told make 100 calls a day,
Right.
and you're just going to ask them, hey, do you know somebody who's interested in buying real estate now in the near future? Like that was the whole.
That was your pitch. Right.
Yeah,
Yep.
pitch. And you would make 100 calls a day, so that 5 people might say they're interested, and out of those 5, 1 or 2 might turn into a deal, right? And then of course you were always told get them pre-qualified. And so when I started understanding what that meant, and then doing it myself, and then training the agents to do it, um, based on their job and what they could qualify for, I'd be able to pick up lots more information. And then that prospecting is what I would use. That information is what I would use to kind of set myself apart from the other agents. Because by the time I went through a whole pitch on what I would do for them, almost like a financial planning, like a de facto financial planner,
Mhm.
even though it's not a certified financial planner. Whenever they try to go out and repeat what I had proposed to them we would do for them to another real estate agent, that other real estate agent would have no clue what we were talking about. So they'd always end up coming back, and then of course as we closed multiple deals with them, they'd refer business. And again, I'm always telling them like, hey, don't get attached to your properties. So the prospecting we would do is don't get attached to the property, we'll upgrade. So then fast forward to today, everything is electronically driven. When we sell somebody a piece of property after we've qualified them, and then of course we're interviewing them and we're comparing how much they're telling us is true. Like we're looking at this entire profile and dossier, who the individual is, and we're asking them to tell us about themselves as though we know nothing. So then it's like that separation of suspect to prospect to potential client. And then as we build them up, we're building that mutual trust. They're coming back for more business, because again, I'm not going to sell them a house, give them birthday cards and Christmas cards every year so that 5 years later they'll remember to use me. I'm telling them, hey, we're going to do 2 or 3 transactions a year if we do it this manner, and then we'll manage these properties for you. That was the other thing is, right, so
Oh, interesting.
what started out as a real estate company evolved into a separate mortgage company, 2 different entities. And then of course, because we're selling multifamily, it requires management. A third vertical, which is just management company, came into existence to manage the assets of the properties we sold clients. And then because we're giving them an entry strategy, and then an exit strategy, meaning that your property is projected to be valued at X, and based upon the future value, based upon the rents that we're proposing to do that fall within legal guidelines, nothing that's crazy, you're going to get this much capital gain. When you get to this point in time 2 or 3 years later, you're going to have an option to keep it or sell it. And so that prospecting, the sales from 2.5 years ago turned into the listings from 2.5 years later. And then of course, because people are coming looking for, hey, we hear you guys, do a lot of asset planning and can sell us apartment buildings at cash flow. Well, those same buildings that we're listing 2.5 years later, 3 years later, become our listings, and then we're just simply putting new clients into them and then leapfrogging them in, right? So when I first started buying in the late 90s, you got this whole you have these really, really high cap rates and really high cash on cash returns. And because the values were very low. And as the rates dropped, the values went up. So case in point, something that might have been a 45% cash on cash return with a 10% down or a 3% down or a 25% down, 2.5 years later, we would sell it at a substantial capital gain to the next person. And then instead of being like a 45% cash on cash, they might be buying at a 35% cash on cash. And we just kept using that model, whether it's as that decreasing cash on cash up until it got to the point where it was like a 10% or 12%, and then we didn't go below, or it met a certain debt service or it met a certain cap rate. These were the denominators. Then they would allow us to resell these properties over and over again, and that was where our prospecting came from, right? And so because that was the mantra we had sold the agents, we controlled a big chunk of the market between 2000 and 2007 as far as just multifamily sales. And then of course that allowed me to segue into building and being a developer, right? So the syndication piece came into existence because, keep in mind, those same clients that became agents of mine, the ones who didn't become agents, they just became more real estate investors. And when we would do cash out refinances, they'd be sitting on liquid cash that was tax free, and then would be getting paid down by the tenants that occupied their units. So when they're sitting on cash free money, they could go buy a motor home, buy a boat, or they can invest it with me in a development project, right? So when I first started doing syndications was like 2004, and I had actually the funny thing is, one of my clients was a corporate attorney, and I sold him and his wife multiple apartment buildings. And then later he didn't like law, so he said, "Hey, let's start a fund," right? And this was back when it was what we now call Regulation B, which is you can't advertise word of mouth through friends and family and people you directly know. So we raised about 15 million back in 2004, and we used that to build a 64-unit condo community, a 20-unit condo community, a 24-unit condo community, and a 14-unit townhouse, right? So those are my first community projects between 2004 2003, 2007. And of course, we'd find the property, we'd set up a single asset entity, we'd get it approved and entitled, and then get a construction loan, build the units. And then of course the real estate agents that I had working for me, which went from at the time from 88 real estate agents that were first my past clients in 1998 and 99, to by 2004 we were about 80 agents, right? So I had 80 real estate agents working in a brick and mortar office, and then I had 40 loan officers working in a brick and mortar office. So when we would do these condo developments, I had a sales force right there to go out and move my units, and I had loan officers doing loan origination, doing the loans behind them. And so we were very vertically integrated. We would sell the real estate, make the commission on the real estate company side, do the loan, make the points on the loan company side, and then we would make the profit, the capital gain from the single asset entity that held the project. We do our GP splits and LP splits and do the waterfalls, and a lot of the LPs were past clients, so they get their basis back and they get their share of the profit, and it was real good, right? And that, of course, we had these great times between 1998 to like 2007, and then like 2007, Great Recession occurred, right? So that was kind of that jumping into investments on multifamily, syndications, development. As the interest rates came down and then the cap rates got lower, the values in California jumped up. And so of course, when we're not building new condos in California to sell to just first-time buyers, the apartments that we had sold, we would 1030 exchange them into other states, right? And so that's how I got my exposure to like Arkansas, Tennessee, Texas, Florida, New York, Maine, Arizona, and then Nevada, right? So we had done multi-family business and sales in those areas, and that was all occurring between 1998 and 2007. So you had a lot of these verticals going: real estate side, the mortgage side, the property management side, the development side, and it was a great time to be a part of until the Great Recession. And then people we were partying with in like 2006, like from Lehman Brothers in New York. By 2007, we're
No.
watching them on the news, just getting obliterated. And then, of course, fast forward to years later, they're making movies about this stuff. It
Right.
was a very interesting time.
Yeah, no doubt about that. That's fascinating. So you haven't quite fast forwarded to today. Where are the hot markets that you're in? What do you see, up and coming in multifamily?
Oh, great question. Great question. I mean, like, uh, I've seen a lot more syndications begin to occur, right? So, like, you're asking, like, from an independent broker standpoint, how are we prospecting? And
Absolutely.
we use a lot of technology. Like, one of the things I touched on was just being able to take an individual from an agent's perspective, or someone doing a sale, getting as much information on that individual, so that when we're interviewing them as to what their goals are, we're a lot easier. We're able to advise, based upon how they make their money, if they're gainfully employed or they're self-employed, right? And so when we're looking at deals, a lot of the types of deals that we used to have access to back in those days when the interest rates were high and the prices were much lower, they a lot of them have gone away because the values have just gotten way too high, at least in California. So a lot of the types of transactions that we are doing now are more syndication driven, and of course we're pooling together multiple individuals' capital in the form of a limited partnership where they've entitled to a percentage of the returns on, if we're buying an existing apartment building and then managing it and then turning it around. But from the standpoint of having the vertical integration, we're able to serve the needs as an agent, right? Because we're creating an entity, an
Right.
LLC.
Right.
That LLC is now the client, and that LLC is going out and making offers to buy a large multifamily, but the individual buyers themselves might be the limited partners that are uh, putting in the portion needed for the down payment and the closing cost, while the loan, I'm securing the loan with a first position non-recourse loan, right? And of course, when then we're managing the building and distributing profits. So from an independent broker standpoint, a lot of the transactions we're doing, because of that syndication aspect, we're essentially creating our own buyers to go out and find apartment buildings. Some of them are properties that maybe we've managed for years and that are selling off because that client is now exchanging into larger units,
Hmm.
and that's been a big deal source, right? Um, there, there, it's the market's been in a state of flux, right? Because on one side, with things like COVID, um, and then the advent of, like, a lot of meeting clients over Zoom, and then also the markets becoming more international. Like, whereas before markets were very local, like our buyer base would come from our local cities. Now they're coming in from different states, or sometimes different countries, and of course we're creating these entities that have buyer pools in them through a syndication that'll then go out and buy a transaction that where we're generating a real estate commission or loan points, and then simultaneously distributing the profit to the investors, and then also giving them that horizon where we're going to either keep the entity for 5 years or more and then either sell it.
Hmm.
Now, of course, in those aspects, those clientele don't really have the benefit of a 1031 exchange. So we've now given those types of clients from the independent broker side the option to either try to buy it on their own, which they can. It's just a lot. It's in some cases it's easier than it was in the late 90s, early 2000s. In some cases, it's a lot more difficult. Where it's become a lot more difficult, and the need for a property management or professional management has come into place, is that, like especially in my state, you've got a very there's a statewide rent control, and then depending upon the city that you're in, not to get too political, but if it's more of a Democratic type of city versus like a Republican type of city,
Right.
then
I
you'll
understand.
see a lot more tenant friendly laws. So when you're servicing the need of an investor, you're trying to guide them through this whole minefield of tenants' rights,
Hmm.
while modulating that with the ability to raise rents in a moderate fashion, so that you're still giving a good return, right? So those now, of course, all that is controlled via software now, right? We're not doing it on calculators and spreadsheets and paper.
Right.
No, we are still using spreadsheets, but now we're implementing a lot of it on the cloud. And then more importantly, we've just started, like my partners, that we started to use AI to and other like APIs to start reminding us or connecting the dots on certain things, right? It's still very experimental. A lot of people there's a new hot word out there called AI agents, right? And what it is just a set of protocols that you might have patched together through APIs that'll turn on one function and then produce an input and then pass it on to another thing. It's not too different from how, as real estate agents and real estate brokers, we're opening up the MLS on one side, opening up our contract writer on the other side, and then doing the work. So that's where a lot of it has changed. And so I think where a lot of deals could be had today, at least from my perspective, is being part of that revolution where you're kind of training the AI agents based upon the wisdom and experience you had as an agent, and how it's changed with the different laws and nuances. So I hope that wasn't too deep into the weeds, but those are where I'm seeing a lot of the opportunities take place.
No, that was fantastic. That was perfectly into the weeds. I think just far enough, and to your point of the AI agencies, putting things together, making things work smoother. I mean, I think that's the point, right? So, and more importantly, I think when you said all the experience you can help put into this intelligence to help everything moving forward, that's the key. That's the key to these, because they're all trained, right? So you're adding the agent's experience, your experience, and training these models to work better based on your clients and your processes and these sorts of things. And I think that definitely hits the mark. If you don't mind, I would love to shift gears here. You
Totally.
were on American Ninja Warrior. Please tell us about that experience. That was very exciting to read. And I haven't watched your videos yet, but I'm gonna look this up.
Oh well, thanks. Yeah, I mean, no, that was a great experience. I mean, just trying to summarize that time. I was on the show for 3 years, from 2015, 16, and 17, and to kind of back into how I got into that. So remember, like shortly after the Great Recession, right? And this was like around 2010 and 11, right? I'm I'm just like a lot of other people. I didn't ride through that perfectly. I mean, I got through it. I kept all my assets, but it was a wild, difficult ride. So of course, along the way, I'm not a tall guy. I got heavy, right? I gained like 20 pounds, and so by the time I get hit 40, right? My brothers are. I'm the oldest out of like five, and I have three
Okay.
brothers that are younger than me, and we're all very athletic. They start body shaming me. So one of
Oh,
them, and they do that with good intention, and it actually worked out well. So my one of my brothers, who's actually one of my brokers that works with me here in the office, he literally starts getting me into the gym with his personal trainer, and then next thing you know, by within 6 months of that, he's got me back into men's physique shape, and I'm competing on stage, not in bodybuilding, but there's a thing called men's physique. Looks like, so it's more of a beach body, right?
okay, right.
So as I'm going through that aspect, right about that same time, there's this phenomenon called Ninja Warrior that starts out on the Sci-Fi Network, and then it suddenly emerges here in the United States, and as American Ninja Warrior. And right around the time that I was going through this whole men's physique craze, and this was something I wanted to do because as a broker, running multiple businesses and being this A-type personality, I'll work these long hours. So the only way for me to balance it was to kind of go the other extreme of being very athletic. And so of course I'm watching these shows and I'm watching these guys do these awesome things that, and I'm just getting into this. And so as the show progressed, different personal trainers emerged in and around my neighborhood that had been on the show.
Oh, wow.
And so as they built these different gyms, and again, so a little tidbit about the show is the producers of the show will create these obstacles with the intention of making sure that the competitor fails, right? They make it just so that it is close enough to failure where most people will fail. So as these competitors are going through it, they're replicating these obstacles and then they're building them in these warehouses and they're forming these gyms. And so some of those emerge, and because I'm in commercial real estate and I've got clients of that nature, some of them were like, "Hey, I want to open up this type of a gym," and so
Oh, yeah.
had the experience of setting up individual people's gyms, and so of course one of those types of gyms was these American Ninja Warrior gyms. And by this time, I'm really into fitness. I'm going full bore into the business world, and so my personal trainer was like, "Why don't you go to this local gym that just emerged that's 10 minutes from your house and see if you could get trained?" And so sure enough, I go there, and these are the guys I've seen on TV. And one of them, a guy named Alan Connealy, owns the gym, and he's going through this program. I was like 45, 44 at the time. And so he goes through this whole training program on how to move and parkour and getting you ready for the show. And so I under his guidance and a bunch of the other competitors who I'd seen on the show that were training in the same facility, I got onto the show. I made my video, sent it in. They selected me, and I was able to be part of that crowd. I was never really famous or anything like that, because the way that the thing you have to remember about the show is it's not a televised athletic competition. It's a TV show around an athletic competition. So they'll focus in on people's stories and everybody else is in the background. Like there's 300 people that are competing in a single night, and then they'll focus in on that story of that's got that human aspect to it. But it was a great experience. I would train regularly with these guys, and the gyms that I would train at that would get me ready for the show. They're still local and operating near me, and I had that experience of being able to hang out and go to the office, work hard, train hard, and then get called back onto the show in 3 subsequent years, and then had that opportunity to do the run. What a lot of people don't realize, like the first time I did, like there's a picture out there on the internet where it's my first time on the run. That was at 3 a.m. in the morning, and
Oh my gosh.
I had been awake, since 8 a.m. the following day, and then appearing on the set at 4 p.m. But by the time I get my run, it's 3 a.m. in the morning. I'm dead tired, but this is the level of extreme fitness you got to be ready for, right? So on one side, it was a huge challenge because it was like, okay, I can't. It's not like I'm going to get a lot of rest. You have to be able to go at any moment, and of course, it's really similar to real estate, right? We don't have set hours. We have to be able to go when the job calls us, and so that I like that aspect of it, and then it just fit with my lifestyle. And then of course I was doing it completely for fun, but what I didn't realize is as I was doing this, it was just continuing to build the whole brand and the business aspect. And so of course it introduced me to a whole set of other clientele that I would have never had access to had I not done the show. So the two kind of had a parity, so to speak, and the rest is kind of history.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's not a planned way generally that you would try to expand your network. You're like, I'm going to get on to American Ninja Warriors to expand my network, to improve my business prospects. Think about that. But everywhere you go, you're your brand. You're talking with people. You're expanding
No,
everything you do and who you know, and you can add value to them if you just ask the right questions sometimes.
you're absolutely right. And so, like, to your point, when I would do this stuff, I wasn't using Facebook or social media for the purpose of monetizing, right? I was keeping
Right.
my work life different from my workout life. But of course, when you're going on a men's physique show or going on Ninja Warrior, you're posting and you're putting this on Facebook or your Instagram, and of course you get a bunch of likes, and every one of those likes would always end up turning into a real estate deal. Or not every one of them, But like,
Wow.
it was almost like cold calling, right? You get a bunch of likes and then one or two deals arise from it. They private message you. You're talking fitness one moment. Next thing you know, hey, how do I invest in real estate? So,
Yes.
I started picking up on the fact that like, okay, um, the conventional rules of back in the day of advertising in magazines was now evolving, right? And in fact, fast forward to today, no, we don't use magazines or the conventional ads to get business anymore. I mean, I have a lot of word of mouth, but a lot of what my business will now come from is social media. Whereas before, it was very unintentional, just posting, shirtless pictures or workout pictures, or like, here I'm at this show on my social media, and then that gets attention, that turns into a deal. I, that now it's become more intentional, right? You have software that allows you to talk about different things, and then as I was seeing other influencers talk about things, I was like, hey, they're just trying to promote what they're looking to do, but of course now that's turned into their form of advertising. And so like when you fast forward today, a lot of what I'll teach my own agents on as far as how to get businesses to have a genuine presence online. Always understand, it's always good to be very knowledgeable in your field, but to get that attention, to get that call back, which nowadays is not a phone call, it's usually a private message, whether it's through LinkedIn, Instagram, or not. And more recently I've been experimenting with TikTok, right? But my LinkedIn, my Facebooks would always get these different uh, private messages that would turn into a deal. There's one of the other things too that I ended up doing. One of my business partners, he ran a little YouTube channel called Keeping It Realty, and between like 2017 and 2019, just before COVID hit, in my office here we had a little studio where we would record a little snippet for YouTube, and that topic was keeping it realty, and we talk about local trends in the neighborhood in the Bay Area. We'd only had like some small subscribership of like 60 followers, but those same people would call and we'd end up doing a deal. And so when we looked at the cost of putting those things together versus like paying for a magazine ad or subscribing to a realtor.com or a Zillow or whatnot, because those things get pretty expensive, right? And from
Right.
a real estate broker standpoint, you always budget money aside for advertising, right? Whereas before it was a magazine, now it's realtor.com, and that could get very expensive, to a couple $1,000s a month. But then when you take that same cash and you put it into a YouTube channel or social media feeds, you get the same type of quality business, and then a lot of times you could be more surgical with the type of clients you're going after.
Hmm.
Right? So just kind of bringing it back to like the topics of your show, those are how we've kind of evolved a lot of our advertising these days. And of course, because we have the ability to run a person's email or things of this nature, as volumes of emails might come through because of prospects going to different real estate platforms like Crexy or LoopNet and downloading an offering memorandum. Those people's emails or contacts when they're expressing an interest are things we can now automate, where we could run them through a database and kind of that'll give us an indication of their net worth and value. That kind of helps us to prioritize who we're going to call back and things of that nature. And of course, that's a lot of how I'll train the agents these days to kind of prospect for deals, which is what we used to call cold calling, right?
Yes. Yes.
And we still do cold calling, right? So we still there's still something to picking up the phone and calling an individual and going, hey, although I don't do that as much these days, it's something that I'll still train the agents to do. But where the trend is going is through the automation. So like shows like yours, when we're going on to them and we're getting that exposure, those same people are emailing us and calling us. And as those come through our mobile phones or whatnot, I have them all being centralized to a database where we could figure out who each person is. So when we call them back, we have enough intel on the individual where we could really give them some guidance if they're
Right.
looking to be represented by us in some kind of a capacity or not. So that's how I've been kind of tying all that back in. And I kind of got a little bit away from your question, but that was how that Ninja Warrior experience kind of tied back into the business.
Yes, you wrapped it right back perfectly. Yes. Um, and that being said, we're going to wrap up here in just a minute, but what advice do you have for real estate agents, commercial or otherwise, getting into the business these days, or in general, someone starting their own business? Because you're clearly, an entrepreneur in your own space and have been very successful. People would want to hear this from you.
That's a great question, David. You know, um, one, always be ready to evolve. Always be ready to change. Don't get too set in your ways, right? But in order to have that mindset, you also have to know, well, what are the trends that people are going towards, and what are the trends that work? And so, as independent contractors, as real estate agents, we are business people, right? We're not working for somebody. And in order to be in our field, you have to be able to be willing to get up every morning and make the call without having to have somebody, prompt you. And
Wake
so
you up.
when you're using that mindset, even in today's age, right? Um, what I always tell all my agents that are coming on board when I'm training them is, here's the different types of tools you now have access to. Your mobile phones have so much more computational capacity than like what they used to get to the moon back in the day. So you could use that. And so, like, for example, a lot of times people will differentiate business contacts from personal contacts. Whereas I always advise them, don't do that. Open it all up into one bucket, because when you have and always make sure you synchronize your mobile phone to your CRM, right? And
Yes.
so that's one of the first things I'll do. And the reason why I'll do that is because in today's day and age, you get so many calls, so many emails, but it's what people don't realize is a perfect database to data mine, right? So as these different calls are coming in and you're figuring out which ones are your clients and you're calling them back, and then you're turning them from a suspect to a prospect, and then once you've actually done a transaction, you've now built this relationship, which ironically, a lot of it will originate over Zoom these days. You like, especially
Mhm.
like in the commercial real estate space, we are not out showing houses in the morning on a Saturday, right? A lot of times our meetings will be on Zoom. We'll make offers on a property like a multifamily subject to inspection, and then we'll meet in person for the first time as we're doing inspections at a building. And so when you take all of that in today's age for an up and coming real estate agent, when you collate all of that data and you're able to filter it through, you're able to get to a lot where I had to get to organically to filter out, well, who are the real clients that are going to be that want my service, and also are probably going to stick with me throughout multiple years. What took several years now, an agent, if they do it correctly, because you got all these inputs from your mobile phone, from your PC, from your iPad,
Mhm.
from different social media, and you're collating it into a central, like, client relationship management tool, or CRM. You could use that to really prospect and then get to know who your clients are. So whether all you're doing is just trying to sell them a piece of real estate or build that relationship, you've got a lot of tools for a lot cheaper than what it used to cost. So that would be my first advice: is take advantage of those tools. And then the other part that I'm seeing a lot of today is people lose a lot of that one-on-one skill, that face-to-face, belly-to-belly skill, because everybody's so text-driven. You've got to really be able to do both, so that you can, when you meet a person, you're not socially inept, right? And
Yes.
so, those are a lot of the key factors. Now, once you've gotten through those aspects, so that people are meeting you, liking you, and then understanding what your pitch is, and then wanting to get on board, which of course is all going to come to that end result of a sale. Don't make that sale just transactional. For me, I was always emotionally invested in my clients. And so when I gave them a strategy about, hey, I'm going to sell you this piece of property, but it's up to you. This was the plan I laid out for you. What I was doing by doing that is I would keep it so that they were always coming back to me for well, what's the next step? Well, that next step would usually result in a mutual benefit where they gained capital gain and got a bigger building, and for me, I got a sale, right?
Mhm. Right.
And as I'm setting myself apart from the other agents, because a lot of times people will interchange agents like toothpicks, right? They won't have that loyalty unless they have that connection. So the more you have that connection with your clients as an agent, the more you're going to have that ability to just keep doing the business for them for like the next several decades. So like a lot of my clients that I met in 1997 and 1998, 99, they're still my clients today. And if they're not my clients, some of them either got their license and came to work with me, and some of them have their kids who I've seen grown up got their license and came to work with me, right? So and again, a lot of that wasn't because I was just trying to be an unreal person. So like the big advice I give to agents is, be yourself, put the client first. Don't think about the money, because the money will come if you're looking for your client's interest, because they're going to see that. Now, of course, having that along with immersing yourself in like tax laws, spreadsheets and all the different laws, those will come into play really well. So like a huge great example of that is one of my agents, a guy named David Pio. He's been with me since 2011. He's like a CCIM professor now. And this guy, it's great. He closes big deals, but he's traveling 200 days a year most of the time. And he's like, when I'm talking about traveling, he's like traveling to exotic places and things of that nature. We're jumping onto a Zoom where, he or either with his client, and they're writing up offers. And of course, he just goes back to the main office when he's back in town. He's doing that deal. Yeah. He's able to live that lifestyle because of that, putting the client first, getting to know them and understanding their needs, and then kind of putting in their mind that, hey, I'm not going to just be here for this transaction. If you let me, I could be here for you for transaction after transaction after transaction. And so when you're prospecting in that manner, you're not constantly having to like rely on the next piece of advertisement to get the next deal, because a lot of those clients come back and do a deal, and then they refer their business to you. So, and in today's day and age, you can do that a lot easier than we had to do organically, where we had to remember people and write them down and then put little reminders in our calendar. You can tie a lot of that now, where it's becoming, and again, I'm not an expert at this yet. I'm just learning this is where the trends are going. And this all goes into, teaching the AI or giving it that pathway of what to do. And so that's what I would give the advice to agents today on really to jump on and have the different technologies do the work for you that we would used to do with through other assistants or transaction coordinators.
Excellent.
So,
Excellent.
Hopefully that answer will be helpful to some of the people in the audience. I know it was a little bit of a long-winded approach, but that's always been one of my flaws. I talk too much.
I think you're talking just enough. You're sharing your knowledge and your experience, and I definitely appreciate it. I'm sure the audience will as well. That being said, Brian Baniqued, thank you for sharing your story with us, spending time with us. We definitely appreciate that, hearing your perspective on real estate and your successes and your personal journey. And it was very interesting to see how that tied back into additional business as well. I mean, our life is business when we're in these spaces in real estate in particular. So, and as for our listeners, thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Technologies Now, The Business Edge, A Broker's Perspective. I'm David Urbach. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, David.